What's up, team? So we're on episode 3 of our live Q&A session in and around real estate and all things getting started, going big, scaling, everything included. And as always, don't feel like you need to watch this thing live. I'll talk about some things in general during it. Totally cool. And I know occasionally there are technical difficulties, so if you get dropped off, no big deal. We'll be back on. So what I wanted to kick off with this week was actually showing a really simple way to take some action that really will force your hand a little bit to get moving, to start getting a look at what's happening out there. Hey, Nate, what's up, man? Thanks for jumping on. And what I wanted to do is share like one of the simplest ways you can get a feel for how to start doing something like today, Sunday, this afternoon, that will cost you basically nothing and add a huge amount of value to what you're doing. So, without further ado, and if anyone ends up jumping on, more than happy to answer any questions. Nate, I appreciate you being here, of course, and feel free to ask anything. What I really want to start with was like the simplest way to think about how we want to see and view what's in our area, how to get out there at no cost and start to meet some people, shake some hands, get some business cards, have something to take action on. So rather than start off here with some Q&A or whatever the case might be, what I actually want to start off with is just a view of how to use a simple free website like Zillow to look at the scale of what's available in your area. All right, Nate, give me one sec, and then anything you got on your mind, love to cover it. So I'm going to share my screen here. And I just want to show a really, really simple thing. Let me find it here. Okay. So, so I just want to confirm here. We're taking a look at Zillow currently. And Nate, can you just confirm it's showing up on your side? I think it is. It's acting weird on my end. So I'm going to assume you're able to see it here. So here's the deal. I'm just in Zillow. I'm not signed in. I don't have any kind of saved search screen or anything like that. And because I'm based in Massachusetts, we're going to do this. I just want to give you an example of how easy it would be today within the next 30 minutes to go and do something. So let's just say I want to search in all of Massachusetts. And I want to take a look at for sale. Excuse me. Okay. There's almost 12,000 listings and another 500 plus that are for sale by owner or something thereabouts. Let's just say, for example, I just want to get rid of all these and I only want to look at multifamilies. So I'm going to select on multifamilies. And okay, wow, look at that. 1,128 listings, 56 for sale by owner. That's a ton. And as you can see, no matter where in Massachusetts you are, there's generally something in the area you live in. If you don't feel comfortable with remote real estate, which is some of the feedback I got was, how do I find things near me or places near me I can take a look at? Excuse me. So what I want to then do is I'm going to go to more. And I suggest everyone do this when they have a chance later on. And you can see sort of all these different selectors and things you can click and search on, right? But I want to just do this. Must have an open house. Okay. We're going to go down. Excuse me. I'm going to hit done. And today I have 139 listings. Okay. So at the time of this being recorded, it's currently 12:19 p.m. Eastern. I can go and check this house out in Wakefield from 2 to 2:30, right? There's 11 to 1, 11 to 12:30. 12 to 2, right? 12 to 2, 11 to 1, 1 to 2:30, all open today, all open right now. So no matter where sort of in Massachusetts, and Massachusetts is a tiny, tiny example. I'll show you a different state in a second here, but all within this little tiny area, I can go and visit any of these open houses today by myself. I don't need anyone to come with me. I'm going to walk in, I'm going to grab some information. They'll typically give you some sheets. There'll be someone there who sort of will welcome you, ask you to leave your name, all that kind of stuff. And what you need to do is just grab their business card and be very honest and say, hey, look, my name is Sean. I'd love to start getting into multifamily homes, but I really don't know a lot about it. And they're going to be able to help you. They're going to be able to give you an idea of what to do next, how to get out and look at properties, the kind of questions to ask, how to get started. They're going to know attorneys. They're going to know property managers. They're going to know contractors. They're going to know title companies. They're going to know people who can get you pre-approved. They're going to have all the connections you need to start taking action. The reason I want you to do something like this, and I think it's so important, is because this is actual activity. Reading a book, watching a video, listening to a podcast, whatever the case might be. It's great to be educated, but education oftentimes lives in the world of academia and not in execution. And you need to start living the world of execution. Because although becoming educated can help you feel good about the journey really only starts when you take a first step. So I just want to kind of give a different example because Ohio is a place where I think we see tons of investor interest, especially newer investors. So let's just do Ohio, give you a quick scale here of difference. Of course, Oh, I pull up Ohio and it gives me the wrong example of what I want to look at, but let's just be specific here. Let's take a look at Cleveland. Oh, of course, I'm sorry. I still have the open house thing on. I'll take that off in a second. So let me just get rid of that for a second here, because I think sometimes with open houses, they do things a little bit differently in different areas. So just looking only at the Cleveland area as an example, I'm looking only at multifamily homes just in Cleveland. Forget about, Rocky Ridge, Lakewood, Parma, Euclid, Cleveland Heights, right? Forget about all this. Just in Cleveland proper, we have 287 listings. Now within Cleveland, there's A neighborhoods, B, C, D, and F. There's places you would never invest, and there's places that might be great to invest. There's places where you'll never see appreciation and zero cash flow. There's some places where you'll have great cash flow. So my point is, start with where you'd like to look, figure out what's available, and then either go out and try to see an open house if you're where I am, or try to set up time with an agent if you're here and get out and take a look at something, right? It's the simplest thing in the world to at least get started and start doing something productive for yourself. So I just want to start with that because again, the mission here is simple, right? It's not enough to keep educating yourself, okay, forever. It's just not. If Elon Musk only ever learned what a rocket was and decided he didn't need to build one because NASA was doing it, where would we be today, right? And it's about action. So again, I just want to call that out. That I want to share this at the beginning. That it's that simple. You can literally go on a website, figure out what's open near you, depending on where you're located, of course, or set up time with an agent who will have all the connections you need, help you get aligned on what to do next, everything else. Okay. So with all that, I know we don't have a ton of people on here today, but I really do thank the people here today as well. So, Manuel, good to see you, brother. Always appreciate to have a big time real estate guy like you on here. Cam, hope all is well. And yeah, Nate, of course, right? Like the one time I pull up Ohio is going to be open houses, but I will give a caveat on that. I do have activity up in the Ohio area. And one thing I think has really become a pain in the butt is there's so many tenants living in the houses. I think the goal is to try to not inconvenience people. Also, from the standpoint of not letting too many people in homes who aren't serious about buying. So a lot of times they will do like an agent led, or sometimes they'll do group showings. I've seen this myself up there quite a bit. So if you can't get into an open house, certainly it's because they're usually doing it as an agent led open or what they'll call a group showing, just so what it's called. Hey Dima, hey, everybody. You know what's funny in West Palm Beach, Florida, man? I don't operate at all in Florida right now. It's not because I don't want to or I don't have plans to. It's just from a consolidation perspective, I don't currently have a team based in Florida. So I'd be curious on your end. Are you looking into investment properties in West Palm Beach? I know Orlando, Tallahassee; those are big areas, and especially because there's strong property management there, I think that's a big driver for where investors tend to go as well. um, Hey Nate, yeah. So can you go through some Zillow properties? Just give a why or why not this house is a red flag. What's overvalued? Um, Maybe I'll pull a few ahead of time because I think it's tough to do at random. Sometimes the problem with Zillow sometimes is they very rarely will list the actual rents. What might be more interesting is to take a look at stuff on LoopNet from a commercial perspective because typically they'll be offering memorandums. And offering memorandums will have actual data rooms. Data rooms are where all the paperwork is. You can actually see rents. You can see leases. You can see all of the breakdowns of what's in there. That's a bit more on the commercial side of the house, but it's a good call out. And I'll talk about that in a second, Nate, too, because I think people will be interested to hear about that a bit too. And Dima, yeah, exactly. Like a lot of open houses. The problem is, as we've seen this wild appreciation in the value of the underlying asset. In this case, it might be a single, a double, whatever the case might be. The issue has become that the asset appreciation in the past couple of years has far exceeded the appreciation in rent pricing. Now, let's call a spade a spade. That's because we can't screw over people and give them no place to live. You can tell me that your house is worth $1 million, but it doesn't mean someone's going to pay you $10,000 a month to live there, right? Because someone who can likely afford $10,000 a month might be buying their own home. And I think this is an important call out too, in terms of having a strength in negotiating. So I want to talk about that for a second here, because I think it's a really valuable point. So Nate, in your point about going through Zillow and looking at different properties, I'll tell you what I tend to do a lot, and it isn't necessarily in Zillow. A lot of times it'll be on like CityFeet or LoopNet or other similar types of websites. Is what I'm often doing is I'm looking at like smaller, either mixed use or residential properties, and I'm scaling that back to a 2, 3, or 4 family. So as an example, there's 3 properties I'm looking at right now, all actually, funny enough, in the Massachusetts area, which I don't typically invest in Massachusetts, but in these cases, I think rents have actually been pretty stable as far as covering some degree of cash flow, as long as you're negotiating strong on the front end. So in a funny sort of scenario here, on all the cases of what I'm looking at right now, it's 3 separate properties. All 3 have mixed use. Hey, John, how are you? All 3 properties have mixed use, right? So where I've got 4, 5, 6 residential units, and I've got 1 or 2 retail or office on their first floor. And the beauty for all of us who are on this call right now is that if you are thinking potentially that you want to get into this, it's the time to act, and you've got your pre-approval, you've got an agent helping you. One of the things that's really useful is to think about repurposing or reevaluating what you can get for cash flow and how you can redo a property. But that's even too advanced for a lot of folks who are just starting out. So what I want you to really think about is, let's just say, excuse me, and Nate, this is exactly where I was just going to go. So I'm going to call out your question here. The hardest part I find as a beginner is knowing and understanding the value of what I could be getting myself into. I want risk, but understandable risk. So I want to talk to you guys for a second about this idea of DSCR. This is a really great way to think about risk in the same way that a bank or a lender will think about it, even if you're a beginner, you've never had a property before. So DSCR is the debt service coverage ratio. So what a bank or a lender or anyone who's providing capital want to understand, very basically, same thing as a beginning investor, is will this property make enough money from rents to cover the debt service, which is PI plus taxes plus insurance, and then any other associated expenses, okay? And then what they're going to also want to make sure is it's not just a one-to-one. So, you bring in $1,000 a month, it's going to cost you $1,000 a month. They also want to make sure that you have some sort of a buffer in there as well. So a lot of times what they'll look for is a DSCR of 1.2, 1.25. So instead of 1,000 to 1,000, they're going to want like a 1.2 to $1,200 to $1,000, right? So they've got a buffer in there. The buffer will protect you in case things pop up and you're not going to get yourself in trouble. This is the exact same way you should approach this as a beginning investor, is to think about it in terms of what will the rent cover? What will I have for cash flow? And I mean actual cash flow after the fact. And Nate, it's a great question. So I want to spend a minute on this. When I did that first episode of this a few weeks ago, I really talked about the fact that I'm much more conservative in the way that I invest in real estate than most people that I know who do the same things that I do, where we're really approaching it from the standpoint, excuse me, of understanding like true risk in the property and the mitigation of risk. So I was explaining this before, and I want to say it again, because I think it's really important to write this down if you haven't done it. When we think about, for every dollar that comes in of rental property, we know right off the bat that we need to peel 10% off, and we pay less than 10%, but we keep it at 10% just because we like to have buffer. 10% gets pushed aside for property management fees. 5% of every single rent dollar goes towards taxes, even though that is oftentimes a little bit too high. We do this anyways. We take 5% for vacancy, 5% for CapEx or capital expenditures. So think a roof, a big HVAC unit, major work that's going to happen at the house that happens only once every 10 or 20 or even 30 years, but making sure you have a big chunk of change ready to rock and roll there. And we actually separate out another 5% just for maintenance. And you might say to yourself when you're hearing this, like, well, there's just no way you're going to get yourself in a position to find a good deal when you're pulling out for PMs, maintenance, CapEx, taxes, everything, right? And I hear this all the time. And I think it's a fair ask, but what you have to ask yourself is, especially Nate, I'm talking really directly to you, but for anyone who's new, you have to decide what is going to make you get off the couch and pull the trigger. And sometimes using math is a great way, to force your hand. So the way that we run this, we look at, I say we because I have a couple different things that I do this in different entities. When I look at a property, depending on which entity it's going in, there might be different metrics or measures. So sometimes I'll have slightly lower numbers. Sometimes I'll have slightly higher numbers. So the reason I do this is the minute a property fits within this mathematical equation, I buy it, bar none. An offer goes right away on that property. Now, we're still going to do our contingencies, right? So we're going to want to make sure we have inspections. And if things come up bad and we still fit the numbers, and we're going to negotiate on that price to get a better deal, we're going to have them either pay to fix it up front, or we're going to expect that much off the price to have us fix it after. And then because we know contractors, we're going to try to get a better deal or a better bid than what we would get otherwise. This gives us more of a win in the front end. And I want to call this out too. It's not that you have to necessarily be super or ultra conservative when you're starting out. It's just depending on the scale of how you buy. Sometimes it's very easy to set it up in a sense of, here's what I buy, here's how I buy it, and here's why I buy it. And you can share this with your realtor. You can share this with the other agent and just tell them, like, look, here's the deal. I want to make a deal, but it has to fit my parameters. If that house has been on the market for 30, 60, 90 days, or if it needs some work, or if we think that they are trying to get rid of it because they can't handle it, or it's a situation they don't want to deal with, this gives you a better chance of actually getting to a yes, because you have actual math backing it up as to why you need this to be the case. All these issues, what equation and formulas I use. Yeah, I think though the thing is, you have to come at this from the perspective of, you have to be flexible somewhere, right? Like, the old saying is like, you can have it cheap, you can have it fast, you can have it perfect. You can pick two, but not three. I think in terms of the way I approach this too, though, is if I expect to have that kind of conservative math, I'm also coming at it understanding that I might have to put more money down, though, right? That will mean a smaller mortgage payment. That will mean more flexibility in hitting that 1.2, 1.25 DSCR. So there are flexible and variable components of the equation. Keep that in mind. So, you might come into a situation, Nate, where you're looking as a first-time buyer to do an FHA loan on maybe a 3 or 4 family. The odds are you're going to crush the numbers on that. That's a no-brainer. The reason I tend to be a little bit more conservative is because we're buying all over the US and we have stuff overseas as well. So we're buying in ways where we have to really account for risk, because I'm not going to see that property probably ever, frankly. In fact, most of them I never even see. Where you're thinking about potentially looking at something like an FHA, and Nate, not to keep putting you up here, but I appreciate the questions. I don't think FHA is the only way to go. I think it's the best way for you to go. Like, yeah, you might seem like you don't have any other option, but frankly, if I could go back in time, I would have bought a 4-family FHA, and oh my gosh, I can't imagine how much further ahead I would be now. I was joking on Twitter the other day that, like, well, not really joking, but I was talking on Twitter the other day that, once I get to about 100 million portfolio size, that's sort of where, like, I'm probably really feeling good. I'm feeling in a good place. That's where I want to be. That's sort of that not end point, but really big goal I have in front of me here. That would have started with buying a 3 or 4 family on FHA. Excuse me. So I just want to call that out, that, like, you shouldn't, like, poo-poo an FHA, man. You should be all over that thing. If you're putting 3.5 down and you're getting a 3 or 4 family, even with that low down payment, if you're getting 2 or 3 other rents in there, you're going to do really well. And then if you double down and can rent out a bedroom or 2 in the unit that you're in, you're going to be cash flowing like crazy. Now, of course, the numbers matter and all those other questions, but you're going to cash flow like crazy. And I would really urge anyone who is hearing this to think about in the same way of what Nate's talking about. I want to call this out too, because I think forgetting about the numbers, the math, the process of actually making all this happen, the scariest part, like bar none, the scariest part is tenants managing, screening, how to deal with all these things. So I think one of the most important things to take a step back from in terms of real estate is that it seems like the most complex, scary thing in the world from 10,000 feet away. When you actually step into Battle Dome, you realize, like, there's actually there's no other competition, and no one actually is going to fight with you. So I think depending on where you are, it's just a question of having let's take this point by point for a second, right? Tenants seem like a really scary thing. And I will tell you, 15, 16, 17 plus years ago, getting a background check, getting references, trying to figure out who this person was, what kind of research I can do, man, that was tough. It was very tough because that information was very hard to come by. You had no idea who these people were. Now, there's so many websites out there where you can do like a $20 credit check, right? Or what you can do is you can go to any real estate office and you can actually list your vacancies with them, and they can market it out, and then they'll get all the applications that come in. You can be very clear on sort of like a minimum credit score, and you can do things like, I need to see verified income, and then you can say, I need to see 3x the month's rent in total income, right? So what you do is you start to add building blocks of protection up to where you're comfortable. Of course, I don't want to like oversell this, but you can start to think about, Nate, where you're comfortable, or anyone else who's watching, when you're thinking about how do I find a good tenant, right? The key word in everything that we're ever going to talk about on here is going to be variability. There's always a different lever you can pull or push slightly, as long as another lever pulls or pushes in the opposite direction, right? If I want to bring down my credit scores, maybe I want to make sure the income's a little bit higher and vice versa. So I think that's a really big part. The other thing with vacancies are not difficult to find if you have a good marketing program in place. So if you're using things like Zillow, like Rent.com, like whoever, right, Craigslist, and you combine that outbound marketing with a really good credit check and income verification, that's the key. And the other thing too is, for really, really cheap money, you can go and talk to an attorney and just say, hey, look, what are the rules of evictions in my state? And you don't even have to talk to an attorney, to be fair. What I would say is go to a local REIA, Real Estate Investment Association, near you, and there's going to be tons of really experienced investors who are experienced in your specific area, specific investment rules, and how they're getting good tenants. I'm going to knock on wood and hope that I don't jinx myself. But Nate, not to blow smoke here, but I've never once had an eviction ever. I am very strict on what I expect from a background check perspective, from a minimum credit score perspective, and I match that up with income. It's not to say that occasionally things don't come in late, but I make it very clear that, if you're more than X amount of days late, it's just you're going immediate eviction. There's no middle ground. Those are the rules. You know them coming in. So there's no need to get there. And I think that the beauty of this is it's also just in thinking about how you're going to source those tenants, where they're going to come from. There's a lot of different ways to do it. But as long as you're matching it up with like a bare minimum of what the other good investors in your area are doing, I think it's a good way to think about it. So it feels really scary, but I'll tell you what doesn't feel scary is when those rent checks come in and you start to see how your mortgage is getting paid off. You have some money in the bank. You're getting appreciation. You're getting depreciation on your asset. You're getting cash flow. The feeling of good from those things oftentimes drowns out the feeling of bad from the other things. Jason, this is a great point. I was reading this while I was talking. Jason's saying he found a small bank that will let me do 10% down on a personal home and no PMI. I'm really, really glad you called this out. I'm actually going to bring up your next comment. I'm really glad you called this out. I've spent a big part of my career working in sales, as well as being involved in, real estate and just investing in general. One of the things that you can do, again, that costs absolutely $0 is go and Google, a 10 or 20 mile radius of your house and call every local bank and local credit union and just say to them exactly the truth. Hey, I'm brand new to this. Here's what I'd like to do. Would you be willing to do this? And in Jason's case, which I'm so glad, Jason, you shared this, you'd be surprised what a local small bank or credit union is willing to do, especially if they think that you're a local resident, you're going to care for the property, especially if you're living there. My gosh, that's a no-brainer, because they're going to keep it on their books. And this is the big call out that I want to Jason, I'm sure you know this. For anyone who watches this at any time, the big call out here is small banks can keep the loan on their own books, right? So what that means is that they're the ones lending you the money, and they're the ones who are going to collect the interest on that. What most people don't realize is when you get an FHA loan or you get a conventional loan, those get sold as securities basically immediately. As soon as it's signed, it's already going out into an investor's pocket. And this is a big, big call out, because that's how money works. I think that a lot of folks don't understand this. In the world of mortgages, we have what's called mortgage-backed securities, or MBS. MBS is a way for folks who are institutional investors or even regular investors to go out and get and earn a strong interest rate on their money. I invested in MBS myself. And with MBS, I can go and get a 4, 5, 6% rate on my money. It's backed by mortgages. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, my God, this is what happened in 07, 08, 09. And that's true. What's different now is that the returns are a little bit lower because we have a lot more verification. What Jason's talking about here, which is such an amazing call, I'm saying it again because I really appreciate you making this comment. These are banks who are like, look, we're not going to sell your loan. You're our customer. We're going to keep you in our house. So they are willing to take on a lot more of the risk. They're willing to take on a lot more creativity. So you can go and talk to small banks and credit unions, and you'll get a lot of crazy good deals done because they want the money on the bank, right? A lot of times credit unions, well, not a lot of times, I mean, a credit union almost by definition is member owned. So if you're a member and you're local and you want to work with them, they're usually willing to at least work with you, or certainly at a minimum, give you an idea of what they would need for you to work with them. So really, really great call out. So I don't even know how to pronounce. I mean, I always appreciate you being on here, and I want to call you by your real name, but I don't know what it is, so I'm going to just go with it. So most important is just to start visiting, start talking to bankers, be ready with your sums. Good deals don't last long. I want to call out two things here. Really great point. I love this, and I think if you've watched the 3 of these episodes so far, you'll know one thing for sure. This is all about taking action and executing, right? Talk to banks, talk to lenders, talk to agents, go to open houses, get offline, get out of the books, get the headphones off your ears, start going out and getting a feel for how to walk a property, what to look for, what are the warning signs in the basement, what kind of rents are in the area, how do I look at comps of other properties, right? Be able to quickly and easily ascertain, what I could do to make the property better and get more rent, what I could do to potentially find a way to get more write-offs. Anything you can do that creates to actually pulling the trigger on doing a deal, the better it's going to be. And I want to go one step further here. When you get a little bit of experience and you're comfortable and you have a pre-approval, do you know how much money it costs to make an offer on a house? 0. If you see a property you like and you can foreseeably understand how you would finance it and the numbers seem to make sense, you can still verify them. You can make an offer on a house for any dollar amount you want. You can come in at full price and then after the fact say, hey, look, after inspection and after looking at the numbers, this doesn't add up anymore. I have to pull out. It doesn't cost you anything, right? Just be clear with the agent that you're not wasting their time, but you can make offers on anything. So you don't have to worry about losing those deals. And I think that when you're prepared with a pre-approval and an agent who understands what you want, you can act faster than all the other people who are kicking tires, because now you're not kicking tires, you're taking action. I think that's a big, big call out here. So thanks for the comment as well. And Nate, again, yeah, like absolutely just want to get your feet wet and into the water and don't want to make a mistake. So I think that this is like 99.9% of everyone who doesn't get into it. They're sort of like, I want to learn to swim, but I'm afraid of the water. And the truth is the water's only up to your waist in the first place. And it would be very hard to actually take a big loss because you're going to be insured. You're going to have people to help you. You're going to have agents. You have an attorney. All these things are there. What I would say is to really define, and Nate, again, I'm pulling up your question, but this is for anyone who watches this because we tend to get, all the views tend to come after the fact, not when we're doing this live. I think defining what it would look like to drown is the first part, right? If you reasonably were able to get into an FHA multifamily, and I mean, reasonably, by the way, and you know that you could afford to make the payment even without rent, right? Even if you didn't have rent, if you could still make the payment, then you're going to be okay right there. If you think that at any given time you're only going to have one of those other units rented out, then you're doing okay. If you can get 2, you're doing even better. If you can get them all rented out, you're probably absolutely crushing it. And because you're going to be putting that money aside for vacancies, for maintenance, for CapEx, for whatever, then it's all that much better. And keep in mind too, I want to call this out, if you're living in the property, you're not going to be using property management. So you're also keeping another 10% anyways. That's not going to a property manager. That's just more going to you. So what I would say is if the deal makes sense, the math makes sense, and you can afford to live there just as is, everything else on top is only giving you more freedom and take more action. But the best thing to do, figure out what you could reasonably get approved for when you're ready. I don't want to rush anybody, but really when you are good to go, get the pre-approval. You shouldn't really wait on it though. Get the pre-approval, start getting some numbers, and get it on a really simple spreadsheet of here are the costs of owning this home, and add an extra 2, 3, 4% on whatever you want to feel comfortable. And then expectations of your income and what you can afford and what you can reasonably expect to come in for rents. Even if you had to say you dropped your rents by 10, 20, 30%, could you do that and guarantee you have a tenant? I bet you could. So there's just an example of how to look at it in a different way, right? And again, though, it starts with getting out and starting to look at some of these houses. And the thing you'll get when you go to an open house or you go and tour it with an agent is you're going to get a deal sheet. This is going to be all the facts about the house. And because it's a multifamily, it is completely fair and completely reasonable that you also request that, excuse me, it's also fair and reasonable that you request a breakdown of expenses. What's the electricity? Is there snow removal? How much are they paying for heat? Who pays for heat? What are the taxes? Once you understand the taxes, who pays for heat and electricity, is it you? Is it the tenant? You build all of that into the number. And then it's just a math equation, right? And you said that earlier, but it's just a question of coming down to math of I could afford this or I can't, and the rent will only make it that much easier. And I think it has to almost be that simple sometimes. um, is there an automatic way to collect rent? I don't yes. I mean, you can have tenants set up systems where it automatically gets pulled out of a bank account for sure. Where I think I see most people, this is like this is another one of those questions where I'm like, I love that you asked this question, Ming. I really appreciate it because I think a lot of folks also get very nervous in terms of like, okay, well, I'm going to buy a multifamily or whatever. I'm going to buy a rental property and I'm going to start renting it out. I've got a good deal. I'm going to find some tenants. I've got my rent figured out. I've got leases signed. Well, now what happens on day one? When do I start to collect that money, right? So you can do it everything from still taking. First of all, don't ever take cash, right? Let's make sure everyone on this call who listens to this understands you don't take cash from tenants. Even with a receipt, you don't take cash. Cash leads to problems. Cash leads to lawsuits. Cash leads to evictions that don't go through. Always make sure you're doing it in a way where you have a receipt that is going to be very, very indisputable. This means canceled checks once they get deposited. This means a site where it can take rent in automatically. So I want to answer the question directly though. There are a number of platforms that exist. In fact, tons of platforms. I can't think of the name of the one I use off the top of my head. I'll look it up for the next show. I can't think of the name of it. Where they just go into a portal, they make the payment directly from the portal, and boom, it hits the account. It's like literally that simple, and it's really cheap money to set these things up. So can you do it in an automatic way? I'm trying to remember if years ago I had an automatic setup. I think I did, but I'm never going to remember the name of it now. But you can definitely work with your tenants to have like an ACH set up with one of these online tools. The only problem there is usually you give your tenants a small window of buffer. It might be, a couple of days, whatever. And I almost don't like to automate it because I don't want them to have to be designated as late and then pay a late fee if it's going to be a 24-hour turnaround or something, right? If they have the money, it just hasn't processed yet or whatever. So you definitely can. You can do it via software. You can do it online services. There's lots of ways to do it. I would just maybe think about how to do it in a way where there's a slight buffer so you're not causing extra fees and processing issues on your end and their end as well. Great call out by Big Ray, who knows what he's talking about here also. Those 30-day plus listings are like, as an investor, that's the flag that goes up in the air where you're really paying attention now, because properties that are on the market for a long period of time are not priced correctly, or there's something in there that you don't know from looking at a listing that are not, maybe won't tell you what's wrong, but something's wrong. Good deals go fast. Okay. That's a really good thing to remember, is good deals go fast. If I see a property that gets hit today, if I have, let me take a step back for a second. Throughout the day, I get emails from like 15 different real estate systems, and you can all do this too. It's totally free. Start with Zillow, start with whoever. And what you're going to want to do is set up a search parameter. Like we were just showing at the beginning of this call, I did Massachusetts multifamilies open houses, right? You could pick like, Cleveland, Ohio, prices between, 50K and 150K, must be a multifamily, right? Stuff like that. You can pick your parameters. Then you save that as a search. And every time a new property comes in, you can set up an instant email so you're notified right away when something hits the mark. I have this set up, obviously, in a lot of different places, and it comes to my phone, and I can look at it, know the area and the price, make some perceived guess on what the rent will be, and know if it's at least worth looking into or not. And that's a key kicker. You can also do this, as Ray says, with deals that are longer than 30 days or 60 days or whatever the case might be. And I love the geniuses that are in the comments, because there's so many smart people who are in this game. It's not just the long-term listings. It's the quote unquote new listings that were already on the market and got relisted. That is a brilliant call out. This is what happens when you list your price. You have a listing price that's too high, and rather than lower your price, which is a sign theoretically of weakness in our game, they're pulling it off the market, usually for, a couple of days, a week, whatever, maybe a month, and then they're putting it back on at a different price. What they're trying to do is get the property to show up as a new listing that hasn't been on for a long time and maintain some of that strength in negotiation. Part of your job in doing the research and knowing what to do is understanding when this happens. The beauty of it is I have no affiliation with I have no affiliation with Zillow, by the way. I just think they have a really simple website that I like to use. So you can go into the listing, scroll down, and it'll actually show, listings, delistings, back on markets, previous sale prices. It's super easy to see all that. And you can get a feel for like, hey, wait a minute, why was this on the market and came back off? So Ray, great call out. And this is a good sign of someone who's really trying to close as well. Because if they weren't serious about doing a deal, they wouldn't relist it. They're serious about doing a deal, but for whatever reason, they need to find a way to get out of it and make sure it looks good, especially as we all know, high interest rates mean pricing pressure in certain areas is going to get very tough. And I think you're going to see a lot of people who jumped into multifamily probably paid really at the peak and now are, and to be fair, I personally know a lot of people who are in multifamilies that got into ARMs. If you got into an ARM and you think those adjustments are going to be really high, now's the time to try to get out. So this gives you the advantage in doing it. Thank you, by the way. I knew you were from Singapore, but June, really, really good to see you drop a name here. I appreciate it. And you know what? It's so different in Singapore. I know the rules and the way they buy is totally different, but I love it too. Like the logic is the same. I am planning to be in Singapore. I don't know when, but I will definitely let you know when I'm there. I love that. Ahmed, as always, thanks for stopping by, man. I appreciate it. And Nate, this is again a really important question that's going to be. I'm going to take a stop for a second. Twitter and YouTube have lots of pockets of people who actually are doing this and know what they're talking about. But the vast majority of people have no clue what they're talking about. And this is why so many people don't know how to take the right action when they're getting started. And Nate, I really appreciate the way you're setting this up and putting this question out there, because this is one of the most misunderstood questions in the world, I think, in terms of why and how to structure these things when you get started. And I think that everyone wants to seem smarter than they are. So they're like, I'm going to talk about LLCs and S Corps versus C Corp and how I'm going to structure my deal as an LP. And here's the deal. Should you start an LLC and or a business bank account? Wasn't sure the tax benefits and other things. So great question. Most banks and FHA and any of the other federally backed companies are not going to be doing a deal with you if you're an LLC. Number one, okay? So if you're looking to do an FHA loan or you're just looking to get started, I don't think there's any actual benefit to doing an LLC. I think it's going to create more work. It's going to make it much harder to get loans because now they're not evaluating you, they're evaluating your business, which also includes you. And it also reduces the liability of the lender, and increases the liability of the lender because your LLC can just claim bankruptcy. And now what do? They're kind of screwed. This is why you pay higher rates and have to put more money down when you use an LLC or any other kind of corporate structure. I also want to call this out too. It's not as simple as just an LLC. A lot of major asset lenders, which is what you're going to be looking at with an LLC a lot of times, are going to want what's called a Delaware LLC, entity-based LLC. And there's different names for that. So someone might say like, oh, I call it this. There's different names for it. But specifically, they're going to want you to start a Delaware-based LLC with typically the ability to have multiple LLCs under the LLC for each and every single property that goes in the LLC, right? Layering protection all the way through. But when you think about it, now you have to pay fees every year for each and every one of those LLCs. You have to do taxes for each and every one of those LLCs. And the LLC is protecting you from what exactly? Nate, I'm not directing this at you, by the way. But I think a lot of folks will see LLC and think like, okay, limited liability company. What a coincidence. I want to have limited liability and not get sued. Cool. If you do something that is negligent, you lie, you cheat, you steal, you do things that are unconstitutional, you treat your tenants and steal their money or do anything illegal, an LLC doesn't protect you. If it's in your name or if it's in the LLC, breaking any law is still breaking the law and you are the one breaking it. So you'll be held liable for that. You're going to have insurance on the property either way. So if someone slips and falls or someone gets hurt or there's a fire or whatever, your insurance is going to cover all of that, whether it's personal or as a business. The LLC is more often used for shielding assets from liability. But again, this is only in certain cases. If it's negligence or it's egregious, they're still going to probably sue you. It just might be that it's a civil versus a criminal thing. And either way, you're not really protecting yourself. I do think LLCs are great. And I think they're important. I think they should be used. But when you're just getting started, the last thing I want to be totally clear. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a CPA. It's my opinion that a lot of times I'll typically buy in my own name and then just simply do what's called a title transfer. Okay. And this is the real big question that usually gets to the root cause of why so many people on YouTube and Twitter are misunderstanding this. If you are looking to, oftentimes we hear this phrase of like, I want to move a property into my LLC. This is just, it's not really what's exactly happening, right? What we're actually doing is we're simply we're transferring the title legally, right? So every state has a slightly different process of how they do this. And even some counties within states will have different ways they do it. But essentially, when you buy a property, you have what's called a title. A title is who owns the property legally. There's a recorded system that then this information has gone into, and it says, oh, here's a previous owner on this day with these terms and et cetera, et cetera. It's now Sean's property. It can be just as easy Sean's property, and now on such and such day, it moves into the LLC's ownership. Now, you have to be careful from the mortgage perspective and make sure that like it's okay to transfer that title. It's okay that they're open to you putting it into an LLC. They may not be, so that's going to restrict things down the road. But trying to use an LLC or a corporate entity to buy real estate right off the bat when you're just beginning, for me, feels like absolute overkill and almost more of an ego play than anything, because it's not going to reduce a whole lot of risk. I would still urge you to spend $100 and ask an attorney that question, and be cognizant of the fact that you're talking to someone who's not interested in charging you to set up an LLC, but just be genuinely honest and say, look, I'm buying my first property or two. It sounds like it's going to be a lot more difficult to get financing, a lot more difficult to get approvals if I'm a corporate entity. Should I do this? And dollars to donuts, I bet most would say no. When I consult, I have an attorney I use for real estate. She's an absolute boss. And we have this conversation all the time. And she said, well, look, if you're doing it with partners, yeah, 100% makes sense, because you want to make sure you're protected from your partner's liabilities, so that if someone sues him, they can't come and take the entire LLC away. You're protected with that corporate veil. But if you're just doing it on your own, a single member LLC, which is what it's called when only one person is the name on the LLC, it's called a single member. The problem with this is it's very hard to prove protection liability when you are, in fact, the entire LLC. Right. So this is why a lot of times it gets very structured and very complex. I had mentioned earlier as well, a lot of the lenders that I'm talking to want to use Delaware-based LLCs. And the reason is because LLCs in Delaware have extremely clear book law on what happens in certain cases, who can buy them, where they can be sold. And a Delaware LLC is going to be securitized like immediately in this case when you work through a broker or an asset-based lender. So just calling that out. So yeah, sorry team for like such a long diatribe on that, but I think on the surface it makes total sense why you would want an LLC, but when you actually look at the crux of it, that's really for when you're getting maybe a bit bigger, a bit more serious, or you're bringing in outside capital, or there's other considerations to take. Many times we confuse tax benefits or structuring with being in a company versus being in our own name, but the reality is it's really about asset protection, and if you're the only person you're protecting, make sure there's a darn good reason why you need it. And it's only going to add complexity. So, if we're talking small potatoes, it's a question of like, how much work do we want to do to cook up and fry those small potatoes? So hopefully that was at least somewhat clear there. And I think it also depends on how much you're spending on the size of the property too. If you're picking up your first property for a few $100K, it is a lot of money to any normal person, but it's a lot different than picking up a 40-unit building for $2 million and having tons of risk and assets tied up in there. It's a big difference in terms of how to properly handle that, manage it, how you're going to bill it out, who you're going to work with, the kind of banks that are going to do the lending, etc. But hard stop, anyone who's watching this, if you're looking at using things like an FHA, Fannie or Freddie, those sorts of mortgages are going to definitely be ones where you're not going to want an LLC involved. Now, again, earlier, the comment on looking at local banks and credit unions, you can ask them that question and they're going to give you the answer. I feel pretty strongly they're going to give you the same answer I gave. But maybe for them, they'd rather loan to an LLC. So just make sure they're clear on that. Maybe they'd rather that so that they have an entity to work with. Just my 2 cents on that. So with the rate pressuring the house prices down in the market, how would you know when is a good time to buy? Looking to buy a single family in Everett, Washington. Man, this is the $1 million question. Thanks for asking it. y- I I think it's really an art and not a science to some degree here. So I think it starts with understanding with a single family home. I'm assuming that you're planning to live in. Let me know in the comments if you're planning to like live in it or planning to rent it out, and that might slightly change the play. Jason, thanks, appreciate it. Appreciate the questions and the points you brought up always. I think depending on whether if you're going to live in it versus you're going to rent it out, are two sort of um, different ways to think about how I want to answer this question. If I'm looking to buy a property and I can potentially get a better deal because the rates are going up, um, I'm going to be looking more at a standpoint of what can I afford, and I'm going to typically be. My assumption is you're going to lock in probably a 30-year. So whatever rate you get is going to be locked. It's not adjustable. So you're going to know upfront what those payments will be over the long term. When it comes to things like a personal residence, I tend to be more flexible in terms of what I'm willing to take on. Like, if it's a really nice property that I plan to be in, I might spend a little bit more and not be as worried about it. Plan to live in it. Okay, cool. So I would simply use that as leverage to try to get a better deal, as opposed to really looking at the timing of when I want to buy it. And I'll give you a real example of why I say this. Um, After the crash in '08, everyone was in all kinds of trouble because in theory their homes were worth so much less than what they paid, and they were really in big trouble. But the reality is they were only in trouble because they had adjustable rate mortgages. If anyone who bought in 5, 6, 7, even the beginning of '08 had bought on 15 or 30-year fixed rate mortgages, their payments wouldn't have changed. Who cares what the house is worth, right? When you bought it, you felt it had a certain value and you liked it enough to buy it. The value becomes a moot point, right? It's the payments that are the real question, is what can you afford and how long can you afford it? The reason why so many people got in so much trouble was because as those rates started adjusting upwards, no one could afford the new payments, and they couldn't refinance because the home values are going down, so they couldn't even get out of the mortgage to get into locked rates. I think the situation we're looking at now is so different. So if you find something you like and you think you can take advantage of the upward pressure on interest rates and leverage that into getting a better deal or negotiating some money off the property, I think that's the better way to treat it. I would just, again, I'm not at all offering financial advice here. This is purely my opinion. I would lock something up I like into a long term 30-year, and if rates happen to go down in a couple of years, I'll refi into a better rate and looking to free up more cash flow. And I don't mean from a rental perspective, I mean just in a personal perspective, like free up more of my cash from going into the mortgage. Um, you know, Washington is funny, right? So we're on opposite ends of the world of the U.S., right? You're talking about Washington. I'm over in Massachusetts, and I think the irony of it is we both have very similar states, albeit different sizes and different locations. And Washington, I don't know Everett, Washington extremely well. I know the name, I know where it is. I've never been there, and I can't speak to the exact points of what's happening there. But what I would say is there's a lot of really good trend information about what's happening market by market as far as price trends. And I think that if you can get your hands on that material, that'll give you an idea of which homes are selling, how fast they're selling for, what the price ranges are, and if they're original asking, over asking, or under asking. And if you're seeing that properties are sitting for a long period of time, if you're seeing that prices are getting cut, I think it's a good sign that sellers are recognizing the fact that buyers need more breathing room in their deals. And I would just start there. Um, my biggest concern in terms of when to buy is that you don't know what's going to happen 6 months after you buy, no matter when you buy. Um, sorry, I didn't finish my story, but I think just want to call this out. After everything crashed in '08, and I felt like things sort of hit like real rock bottom, I went out and started buying. And I was buying properties that were $70,000, $80,000, $90,000. And people are like, oh, the market's still going to come down. You're never going to get your money back on those. And those properties I bought for, some of them 50,000, 60,000. Those properties are worth like, 180, 200, 250, 300, depending on where they are. And I think that there's a great equalizer in time. I think about '08, and to me, because I'm older than probably a lot of folks who are watching this, I feel like that was yesterday. Like that might as well have been 3 weeks ago. And I think about it now, and that while everyone else was running away, um, I just felt that moment when I was like, it's time to go. It's time to act. Um, there were tons of deal is to be had if you're willing to stretch out your horizon of time to a couple of years, right? So I think that's the only point I want to make on that front is, I think you need to build in how long you plan to be there, what you can afford for a payment, and what you're willing to give. But what I will also say is one other thing on this is I think sometimes being very clear on why you need a certain price based on your certain approval is there's so many good points. Sometimes I don't want to get them jumbled. I want to make sure it's really clear. Min, what I would do is I would go to my lender who's going to give me the pre-approval and tell them, hey, let's just say I'm going to use whatever numbers here. Say you can get approved for 500, but you do not want to spend more than 400. Have them write up the pre-approval for 400, knowing you can go up to 500. So when you present that 400K, you can go and look at a house that's 410, 415, 420, and really say to them, like, look, I really want this property. I have to be at 400K. I can close. I've got pre-approval in hand. I can make an offer right now at 400. Will you take the offer? Write it up, and I bet you'd be surprised. You can probably get a lot of those. So know what you want to spend. Have the backup on a piece of paper to show that you can be approved for that, and that's what you're approved for, and use that as your leverage and negotiating tactic. And know that, hey, worst case scenario, they come back and say, look, 410. It's got to be 410. You just go back and get the pre-approval letter updated and get that deal done. You still saved yourself some money potentially. So that's it. I don't want to totally belabor the point, but I think timing is very hard to do, but negotiating is not. Most people just don't negotiate for a living, so they don't always know different tactics to take. So thanks for the great question. So Chris, I just want to pull it out. Two things, because Chris is right, and we sort of covered this, I think, on an earlier call, but Chris brings up a really good point here that I think is going to be repeated for a couple of years, frankly. First piece is this time around, I feel like we'll see a protracted decline in values, as well as, unlike 08, this issue is about stretch valuation rather than systematic credit risk. And this is exactly right. And Chris, thanks for stopping by. You should notice slightly better video quality, but we'll talk about that later. The reason why things really hit the fan so bad was because no one was buying the paper that the mortgages were being written on. And once that happened, then the entire market fell apart. You couldn't get refinances. Everything sort of happened so quick and across so many different factors that it was both from the commercial perspective, the residential perspective, it was on the refinancing perspective, it was the insurance perspective. Everything was crashing at the same time. I think that when we look at the way interest rates rise, and it's going to be area by area, of course, but the nice thing about this is data that's easier to understand, easier to look up, and easier to predict, right? If we think that for every couple of dollars that we go up on, for every quarter of a point that we go up in interest rate, we can predictably understand what that's going to cost us per $100,000 in additional mortgage, right? So we can bring that to the table with us and say, look, this extra half point on this $500,000 home is now going to cause this. I don't have that. I only have X amount, $2,000 per month total to spend. So with this interest rate, here's exactly the price I can pay. And I think probably a lot of what Chris is really suggesting here in two short comments is there's almost a floor built in because we still have to have housing, but that housing is going to have to be based on what people can afford with those new interest rates. So opinion on shifting demographics with households loaded, with households loaded with a lot more debt, like student loans and household formations at low. Where does this leave homes that are 5+? Wow, that's a really great question, man. I was just, Chris and everyone else, I was just having a conversation yesterday afternoon. We were at my son's lacrosse practice, and there was actually a real estate attorney there. I have another friend who's an investor and another friend who does Airbnbs. And we were talking about real estate together. And one of the big things we were discussing was exactly this question was, is this a better time to be investing in, we were talking about apartment buildings. And I was making the argument that like 1 and 2 bedroom apartments right now are sort of really, really looking more valuable than they've ever looked in the past because I can offer a really low rent. I can offer sort of an efficient experience, right? It's a smaller unit. It's got a bedroom. It's got a nice bathroom. It's got a kitchen. It's got a living room, but that's it. No fluff, no extra rooms, nothing else to heat or cool or pay for. And they were looking at bigger and bigger properties because they want to do bigger and bigger Airbnbs and short-term rentals. So this is like a really poignant and perfectly timed point, Chris. I think that your point in demographics is so spot on. We're seeing people taking longer to get married and have kids. We're seeing people in general not having kids. We're seeing people in general not getting married. So I think we're seeing smaller families overall, longer time periods for them to actually get into those situations. And I think because also they're taking longer to get into that family formation, which leads to the bigger families. I think that they're later in their careers, which typically means they have either more money to put down potentially, they can afford a bigger home. So there is this huge gap in the market where we're seeing a lot of luxury homes getting built for big money with, high-end luxurious finishes, whatever that even means nowadays. Um, and I think that what we're finding, at least where I live, is, I mean, it's funny. It's funny when you can use real examples. Um, Probably like a half mile, give or take, up the street from me, they are building 3 brand new homes. They're 1.4 each. They're 5 beds, 4 baths, and I mean they're beautiful. They're brand new homes. They're in the process of building them, and I happen to know the developer. And I was saying to him like, "Wow, man, I wonder how fast these are going to sell." I was sort of like saying it with a tone of caution, because Chris's point, like now with higher interest rates, the need to still get that return on capital, they're really starting to think like, oh boy, what if we can't sell these things because no one needs 5 bedrooms? I mean, I look at my own family. There's 4 of us, right? Plus the typical American thing to say, and I have a dog. Um, but there's not a day that goes by where I don't think, I could probably shave 500 square feet off this if I really wanted to. I would still be perfectly happy and not paying so much for taxes and heating and cooling. And I think more and more people, as the mindset shifts to what I can comfortably afford with student loans on top, without a partner in the house to help me afford it, then it's a question of like, do I really want to rent out my bedrooms and house hack? So I think there's this huge dichotomy that's happening. And you know what, Chris, I'm really glad you brought this up. I meant to mention this earlier in the podcast here. We've got on one hand Nate with absolutely love the point on using an FHA loan to get a multifamily so that you get some help to pay for your mortgage and essentially live for free. We've got other folks who are constantly talking about, which I love too, by the way, of like, what if I buy a property and rent out my rooms? I have a good friend who just bought a condo in DC. And if you're not familiar with the DC market, prices are insane. He had already lined up a buddy to rent one of the rooms from him. So he's basically getting a net even break and now gets to own a property. Chris, I'm literally about to join, but I'd like to have you on. I'm about to join. I actually have to cut in a second here, but I'd like to have you on in the next one. We can totally talk about this at scale. I think that what is happening is we have on one realm a lot of people in the market who are looking at this and saying to themselves, on one hand, they're saying, I want to build my financial future, so I'm going to house hack my way into doing it. This is roommates, this is an FHA into getting a multifamily. On the other side of it, we have people who are like, look, I can't afford to buy anything. I just want the smallest rent possible, as quick as possible. And then when I'm ready or I have a partner or whatever, then I'll be ready to buy my home. I'll save up my money till then. And I think that there is in the middle class, the average, 2 married people, 2.2 kids, right? That middle is getting shifted later and oftentimes smaller. So that need for the gigantic McMansion that's going to cost you 7 figures is sort of shrinking. But at the same time, the expectation is I want to buy a home that's completely turnkey, ready to roll, needs nothing done to it. So there's a lot of differences in the way things are getting done. When I bought my first house, the goal was like, I want to buy it for as little as possible, know that I'm going to need to do some work for it, in a couple of years, flip it, not have to pay the taxes and move into a bigger home. I think a lot of people have pushed that off so far that we're going to end up in this weird spot where we go from having no inventory to having a lot of inventory. And my final point, and I'll call it a day, and Chris, I'll ping you separately. When I look at multifamily in my area where I live, there's very, very little on the market. In fact, I mean, I literally just did this the other day. Like in the entire probably 10-mile radius around me, there was only about 15 total multifamily properties, and the pricing was wildly, wildly high. Like 2 families for 7, 8, 900K. So when I call the realtors, I'm not really looking to buy. I'm more asking out of curiosity. I'm saying to them like, hey, I'm just trying to understand at a 800K price tag for a two family, what kind of rents are you getting here? And they're like, oh, you're getting like, 2,500, maybe even 3 grand. But if you know mortgage math, that does not cover the mortgage when you talk about PITI plus a higher rate because it's an investment property, plus the higher insurance because it's an investment property. So on one hand, you're either going to buy it and still have to pay to own it, even after getting rent, or you're going to live in it. And now you've got a mortgage for, 8 or 900K. I mean, maybe put some money down, but whatever. So in certain areas, it's just not making sense. This is the same exact thing we see in the stock market for those who follow the stock as well. When things are great, growth stocks are the place to be. When things are bad, people shift back to value and dividends. There's always an ebb and a flow. Real estate is the same way, right? When things are really high, there's a huge kick to buy multifamily to help you pay your mortgage. When things are really low, we see a shift away from multis and back into singles. And this is where, for a smart, prepared investor, even if it's not a huge crash, it's just a downturn, you can take advantage very easily and jump into a multifamily with the right numbers that you've prepared ahead of time, with an offer that's prepared ahead of time, with a pre-approval that's prepared ahead of time. And you can like bang, bang, make an offer, make a decision, do the inspection. And if it's not a good fit, you get out. If it's a good fit, it's yours. So being prepared to act and understanding how the market moves and ebbs and flows gives you the advantage over everyone else who's not taking that advantage. And Nate, just the shift is definitely happening. I'm about to be 22. I know Nate's a young gun here. No one in my age, and I mean no one, thinks of buying a home because it's too expensive and scary because their parents talk about how bad '08 was. Totally true. So to give you some perspective, everyone in your sort of realm is talking about '08. I'm going back to like the 90s and '01, and I'm looking at like what happened after that. But the advantage is, well, they all talk about what happened in '08. If you hear my stories from '08, it was all about how as soon as everything crashed, I was ready to start buying properties for 50K a piece that I'm now selling or holding that are worth at 250, 300 a piece. So it's important that we don't just look at what happened that was bad, but then what happened after the bad thing happened. How long did we have to wait for stabilization? How long did we wait for price appreciation? How long did it take for the rest of the market to jump back in? That's where real estate investors become multimillionaires, by buying only one house and using that as the bankrolls the whole rest of the world that they're living in. I'll end with this comment because I think it's really spot on. And before I do, I just want to say genuinely thank you everyone for jumping on. Always appreciate the questions. I love talking about this, so I'll keep doing this as long as people want me to. I don't care if only one person joins. I just like talking about real estate. And by the way, Chris, this is to you, but to everyone, I'm more than happy to have anyone on who just wants to talk about real estate in general. I think it's absolutely worthwhile. Most of my friends think I'm crazy wanting to buy one ASAP. Only a couple understand the true value. The problem with real estate is there is no other sure way to become wealthy that on paper seems to take so long. But when you step back and realize that the way you make money on an index fund or an individual stock is you need that price to go up over the long term and stay consistently at that price over the long term without the risk of coming back to zero. So some people will make the arguments, well, what about dividends, right? Well, dividends get a 4% yield on an index fund, perhaps, probably not even that high. And they say, well, that's how I'm going to do it. The difference with real estate is you're getting unbelievable, massive multiplied leverage on real estate. And you're getting appreciation, depreciation. You're writing off the taxes. You're writing off the interest on your mortgage. Other people are paying your mortgage for you. That's just 5 off the top of my head. There is no comparison in building massive wealth. You can get wealthy doing anything if you do it right and you care, but only rental real estate gives you such a massive multiple of ways that you are making real money. And I'm going to make a final comment here. Nate, I want you to think about this too as you're looking for your first property. There is a big difference between what you end up with in completely free capital at the end of the day versus what you actually are sitting on for cash. Because remember, all the holdings, the maintenance, the CapEx, the vacancy, that is money sitting in your bank account that can be earning interest or sitting somewhere very safe until you need it. So it's not just gone forever. You're still getting that. And with every mortgage payment that those renters make, they add that back to your total wealth. And with every bit of depreciation that you're going to write off on that property, that's back to you in taxes. So the amount of ways you start to think about the fact it's not only cash flow, it's not only appreciation, it's not only paying down debt, it's not only multiplication. you can really start to see how wealth is built at scale. Um, One thing I'll also do is if I decide to make a move and try to close on any of these commercial properties I'm working on, I'll share the process on here as well as how I'm working through a DSCR loan right now. Um, I'll try to really make sure I start it from the total beginning so you understand the whole process, the decision making, etc. Because this stuff goes from being buying your first property to getting very complex depending on how you want to play it. So remember that at the end of this, right? If you take action, you're not going to regret it. And it doesn't mean you have to buy, you have to make a mistake. It just means that you have to take action to get serious about it. So, everybody, thanks so much. Thanks for the questions. Really, really appreciate it. Hope you have a good rest of the day. And go see a damn open house today, will you please? They're all out there. So, with that, I'll see everybody later. Thanks so much.